Imagine you're standing on the edge of a frozen river in what is now the Czech Republic. The year is 23,000 BCE. It is the height of the last glacial maximum, and the wind is a serrated blade cutting through your layers of mammoth hide. You haven't eaten a meaningful calorie in 4 days. Your last meal was a handful of dried crowberries and a strip of lean, tough reindeer sinew. By every metric of modern logic, you should be a trembling wreck. You should be distracted, weak, and fumbling. But as you crouch in the tall, frost-shattered grass, watching a herd of horses move across the valley, something impossible is happening. Your vision is actually sharper than it was when you were full. Your sense of smell has become almost predatory. The fog of fatigue has lifted, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity that makes every movement of the grass feel significant. This is the paradox of the ancient human experience. The less you have to eat, the more capable you become of finding food. You are currently more dangerous than you have been all month. But if hunger is supposed to be a signal of impending death, why is it making you feel like a god? The answer is that everything you've been told about hunger is a sanitized, industrial-age lie. We have been conditioned to view the sensation of an empty stomach as a medical emergency, a physiological red flag that needs to be extinguished the moment it appears. We treat a growling stomach like a low-battery notification on a smartphone, assuming that if we don't plug in a snack immediately, the system will simply shut down. This is, quite frankly, an insult to 3 million years of hominid evolution. In reality, for the vast majority of our history, hunger wasn't the enemy of performance, it was the catalyst for it. Ancient humans didn't survive in spite of hunger, they survived because they knew how to weaponize it. They understood that hunger is not a depletion of resources, but the activation of an ancient, high-performance operating system that most modern humans have forgotten how to boot up. And if you think your body is currently running at its peak, you're ignoring a biological heritage that was forged in the fires of scarcity. To understand what we've lost, we first have to dismantle the most pervasive myth in modern nutrition, the starvation mode panic. This is the idea that if you skip a single meal, your metabolism will plummet and your body will begin cannibalizing its own muscle to survive. This myth gained massive cultural traction following the Minnesota starvation experiment in 1944. Led by Dr. Ansel Keys, researchers took 36 men and cut their caloric intake by half for 6 months. The men became lethargic, depressed, and obsessed with food. However, there is a massive, often ignored detail in that study. Those men weren't fasting. They were being semi-starved on a high-carb, low-protein diet of bread, potatoes, and macaroni. They were constantly spiking their insulin, which prevented their bodies from ever accessing their stored fat. They were stuck in a metabolic no-man's land. Their bodies were screaming for energy because the insulin in their blood was locking the doors to the massive fat stores they already had. Ancient humans never lived in this semi-starved state. They lived in a cycle of feast or nothing. When they didn't eat, their insulin levels dropped to near zero, which acted as a master key. It allowed their bodies to tap into the hundreds of thousands of calories stored in their adipose tissue. For an ancient hunter, the transition into a fasted state wasn't a decline into weakness, it was a transition into a different fuel source. Which, incidentally, is a much cleaner and more efficient fuel than the glucose we rely on today. When you stop eating, your body doesn't shut down. It switches from being a coal-burning steam engine to a nuclear-powered submarine. You have an internal battery that is designed to run the entire ship for weeks, but because we eat every 3 hours, we've forgotten where the on switch is. We've become metabolically brittle, trapped in a cycle of constant refueling that has made us biologically soft. But the physical energy is only half the story. The real secret of ancient hunger lies in what it does to the brain. There is a specific evolutionary trade-off known as the expensive tissue hypothesis, first proposed by anthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler in 1995. The premise is simple. Both the brain and the digestive tract are incredibly energy-hungry tissues. For our ancestors to grow the massive, complex brains that allow us to think, reason, and invent, we had to sacrifice the size of our guts. We have significantly smaller digestive systems than our primate cousins because we shifted to high-quality, nutrient-dense foods. But this created a precarious balance. We have a brain that demands 20% of our total resting energy, which means when food is scarce, the brain should be the first thing to suffer. Except that isn't what happens at all. Instead of the brain slowing down during hunger, it actually enters a state of heightened neuroplasticity. Research led by Mark Mattson, a professor of neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University, has shown that when the body is in a fasted state, the brain produces a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Think of BDNF as Miracle-Gro for your neurons. It stimulates the growth of new brain cells and strengthens the connections between existing ones. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. If you are a hungry hunter-gatherer 50,000 years ago, being hangry or foggy would be a death sentence. You need to be smarter, more creative, and more observant when you're hungry so that you can find the solution to your lack of food. The brain doesn't wither in the absence of calories. It sharpens itself like a blade. Ancient humans knew that a certain level of hunger brought a clarity of thought that a full stomach never could. They used this state to track animals over hundreds of miles, to memorize the locations of thousands of plants, and to navigate landscapes without maps. But this sharpened state is something we haven't even begun to explore. If hunger makes us so capable, why does it feel so bad for us today? Why do we get shaky, irritable, and lightheaded at 10:30 a.m. if we skip breakfast? The answer lies in the 2006 study by researchers like David Cummings on the hormone ghrelin. Ghrelin is often called the hunger hormone, but that's a bit of a misnomer. Ghrelin is actually a Pavlovian signal. It is a hormone that your body releases based on expectation, not actual need. If you eat breakfast every morning at 8 a.m., your body will begin secreting ghrelin at 7:45 a.m. It's an internal alarm clock telling you it's time to eat. If you don't eat at 8 o'clock, the ghrelin levels will continue to rise for about an hour, making you feel increasingly desperate. But here is the part that ancient humans understood intuitively. If you simply ignore the signal, the ghrelin levels will drop back down on their own. Hunger isn't a linear progression that gets worse and worse until you die. It comes in waves. Ancient humans knew that if they pushed through that first wave of ghrelin, the hunger would vanish, and they would be rewarded with the metabolic switchover we talked about earlier. Modern humans, however, have been conditioned to interpret that first wave of ghrelin as a crisis. We eat to stop the discomfort of the alarm clock, never realizing that the alarm would have turned itself off if we just waited 20 minutes. By constantly silencing these signals, we have lost the ability to distinguish between habitual hunger and true physiological need. We are essentially toddlers crying because our favorite toy was moved, while our ancestors were masters of a biological symphony that we can no longer even hear. This mastery went beyond just individual survival. It was baked into the very way ancient humans structured their societies. Anthropologist Marshall Solins famously called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. He noted that in many environments, ancient humans only had to work, meaning hunt and forage, for about 3 to 5 hours a day. The rest of their time was spent in a state of what we might call productive rest. They weren't eating 3 square meals. They were often eating one large meal every 24 or 48 hours. Which, if you're keeping track, is exactly what modern biohackers call intermittent fasting, or OMAD. But for them, it wasn't a trend, it was the rhythm of the universe. This rhythm allowed for a process called autophagy, a term coined by Christian de Duve in 1963, which literally translates to self-eating. Autophagy is a cellular garbage collection system. When your body is in a fasted state, it begins to identify and break down old, damaged, or misfolded proteins and organelles. It cleans out the cellular junk that leads to inflammation, aging, and disease. Because ancient humans spent so much of their lives in a fasted state, their bodies were constantly undergoing this deep clean. They were regenerating their immune systems and repairing their DNA on a daily basis. Compare this to the modern human, who eats from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to bed, effectively disabling the autophagy switch for decades at a time. We are walking around with a lifetime's worth of cellular trash in our systems because we never give our bodies the 16 to 24 hours of silence required to start the cleanup. We've traded cellular longevity for the fleeting comfort of a granola bar. But there is a darker side to what our ancestors knew about hunger, and it's hidden in our very DNA. This is the concept of epigenetic memory. In the late 1980s, a researcher named David Barker noticed a strange pattern while looking at birth records in England. He found that babies who were born small, meaning their mothers had experienced nutritional stress or hunger during pregnancy, had a much higher risk of heart disease and diabetes as adults. This became known as the thrifty phenotype hypothesis. Essentially, if your ancestors experienced severe hunger, they passed down chemical tags on their DNA that told your body to be incredibly efficient at storing fat. Your body is currently expecting a famine that might never come. Think about the implications of that for a second. For 300,000 years, your ancestors survived through periods of incredible scarcity. Every time they went days without food, their bodies were taking notes. They were fine-tuning their metabolism to survive the next drought, the next ice age, the next failed hunt. You are the product of an unbroken chain of survivors who were the absolute best at being hungry. You carry the thrifty genes of people who could walk across continents on nothing but water and sheer willpower. But you are living in an environment of unprecedented caloric abundance. You are using a high-performance survival engine to navigate a world where the biggest physical challenge is choosing which delivery app to use. This is a catastrophic biological mismatch. Your body is screaming to store every calorie you eat because it thinks the mammoth is about to disappear, but the mammoth is now a 24-hour drive-through that never closes. We are drowning in the very fuel our ancestors died to find, and our bodies have no idea how to handle the surplus. The reality of what ancient humans knew about hunger reaches its climax when we look at how the Industrial Revolution fundamentally broke our biology. Before the 1800s, the concept of breakfast as a mandatory meal didn't really exist in most of the world. In medieval Europe, eating early in the morning was often seen as a sign of spiritual weakness or poverty. It wasn't until people were forced into factories and needed to coordinate their eating with a mechanical clock that we invented the 3 meals a day structure. We didn't start eating breakfast because our bodies needed it. We started eating it because the factory whistle told us to. We replaced a 300,000-year-old biological rhythm with a 200-year-old economic one. This shift did something even more insidious. It destroyed our metabolic flexibility. In a 2019 study published in the journal Cell Metabolism, researchers found that the average modern human eats across a 15-hour window every day. We are in a fed state almost 100% of our waking lives. This means our bodies have completely lost the ability to burn fat. We are like a car that has 2 fuel tanks, a small one for gas, glucose, and a massive one for diesel, fat. But the fuel line to the diesel tank has been rusted shut for years. When our gas tank runs low, instead of switching to the diesel tank like our ancestors did, our engine just starts to sputter and die. We feel that hangry crash because we literally don't know how to access our own body fat anymore. We are starving in a body made of fuel. So, here is the reveal that reframes everything. Hunger is not a signal that you need to eat. Hunger is a signal that you are about to switch fuel sources. That gnawing feeling in your stomach isn't your body saying, "I'm empty." It's your body saying, "I'm ready to begin the deep work." It's the sound of the secondary engine trying to turn over. When you eat to stifle that feeling, you aren't fixing a problem. You are interrupting a vital biological process. You are stopping the cleaning of your cells, you are shutting down the production of BDNF in your brain, and you are preventing your body from exercising the metabolic muscles it needs to stay healthy. We have pathologized the very thing that made us human. We have taken the most powerful survival tool in our arsenal and labeled it as a symptom to be cured. The ancient humans of the mammoth steppe didn't have a word for intermittent fasting. They didn't need a study from Johns Hopkins to tell them that they felt sharper on an empty stomach. They lived it. They knew that the first hunger was a lie told by the stomach, but the second hunger, the one that arrived after 24 hours, was where the magic happened. That was the state where the hunter became the hunt. That was the state where the shamans saw the visions. That was the state where the tribe found the strength to cross the Bering Land Bridge. They understood that comfort is a slow poison for a species built for challenge. They lived in a world where hunger was a constant companion, a teacher that taught them the limits of their own resilience. And in doing so, they became the most dominant apex predator the planet has ever seen. Now, think back to that hunter on the edge of the frozen river 25,000 years ago. He is cold, he is empty, and by your standards, he is suffering. But he is more alive in this moment than most of us will be in our entire lives. His heart rate is steady, his focus is laser-like, and his body is a masterpiece of efficiency, burning through his own fat stores with surgical precision. He doesn't want your granola bar. He doesn't want your balanced breakfast. He wants the hunt. He knows that the feast waiting for him at the end of this hunger will be the most rewarding experience of his life, not just because of the calories, but because he earned it with his own biological mastery. He is the version of you that was never told that hunger was a mistake. But we have to be honest about why we run from that feeling. It's not because we're afraid of starving. We live in a world where that's virtually impossible for most of us. We run from it because hunger is a form of truth. When you are truly hungry, you can no longer lie to yourself about your needs versus your wants. You can't use food to numb your boredom or your anxiety or your loneliness. Hunger strips away the layers of modern comfort and leaves you with nothing but your own raw biology. It forces you to confront the fact that you are an animal, an incredibly sophisticated, high-performance animal that has been trapped in a cage of its own making. And the bars of that cage are made of cheap carbs and constant snacks. We avoid hunger because we are afraid of the intensity that comes with it. We are afraid of the version of ourselves that might wake up if we stop feeding the beast every few hours. The truth is, your body hasn't changed since that hunter stood on the riverbank. Your DNA is virtually identical to his. Your brain still has the capacity to produce that Miracle-Grow protein the moment you stop eating. Your cells are still waiting for the signal to start the deep clean of autophagy. The nuclear-powered submarine is still there, sitting in the dock, waiting for you to turn the key. But as long as you continue to view hunger as a medical emergency, you will never leave the harbor. You will continue to run on the coal of constant glucose, wondering why you feel tired, why your brain feels foggy, and why you can't seem to lose the weight that your body is desperately trying to use as fuel. You are ignoring the most powerful piece of technology you will ever own. And that leads us to a final, uncomfortable reality that most people aren't ready to hear. Which, if you've made it this far, you probably suspect already. We like to think that we are the most advanced humans to ever live. We have the internet, we have modern medicine, and we have global food supply chains. But in terms of metabolic health, in terms of neurological resilience, and in terms of raw survival capability, we are the most degraded version of Homo sapiens to ever walk the earth. We are the only version of our species that has ever been too full to function. We have traded our biological edge for a bowl of cereal and a comfortable chair, and we call that progress. But progress is a subjective term. Is it progress to lose the ability to think clearly without a morning coffee? Is it progress to be so metabolically brittle that a skipped lunch makes you aggressive and weak? Our ancestors didn't have our technology, but they had a level of self-mastery that we can barely imagine. They knew their bodies as instruments of will, not as vessels for consumption. They knew that the stomach is a terrible master but an excellent servant. They knew that the path to true capability didn't lead through the pantry, but through the wilderness of their own restraint. And they knew that the most important things in life aren't found when you're full, but when you're empty enough to finally see clearly. So the next time you feel that first familiar growl in your stomach at midday, don't reach for a snack out of habit. Don't listen to the industrial alarm clock that's been ringing in your head since you were a child. Instead, try to remember that frozen river in 23,000 BC. Try to remember the hunter who was sharpened by the very sensation you're trying to avoid. Take a breath and wait for the wave of ghrelin to pass. Wait for the metabolic switch to turn over. Wait for the ancient operating system to boot up. You might be surprised at who is actually waiting for you on the other side of that feeling. You might find that you're not actually hungry at all, you're just finally waking up. After all, your ancestors didn't spend 300,000 years perfecting the art of survival just so you could be defeated by a missed bagel. The story of human history is a story of hunger. It is the thread that connects every great migration, every technological breakthrough, and every artistic masterpiece. Hunger was the wind at our backs for eons, pushing us to explore, to innovate, and to become more than we were. When we settled down and industrialized our food, we didn't just solve a problem, we severed a connection to our own nature. We became a species of permanent feast, and in doing so, we became biologically stagnant. But the hunger hasn't gone anywhere. It's still there, coded into your genes, waiting for the moment you decide to stop running. It's not an emergency. It's not a crisis. It's an invitation. The only question is whether you're brave enough to accept it. Because here is the cold, undeniable fact that should keep you up tonight. Your body is currently designed for a world that no longer exists, and because you refuse to let it be hungry, it is slowly turning its survival mechanisms against you. For 300,000 years, your ancestors thrived because they could endure days without food, but you are living in a society where the average person cannot go 6 hours without a spike in blood sugar. You are a high-performance survival engine being fueled by garbage and kept in a state of perpetual idling. This isn't just about weight or health. It's about the fact that your comfort is literally rotting you from the inside out. Your body is ready for a marathon, but you're giving it a nap. Your brain is ready for a hunt, but you're giving it a scroll. The ancient world is still inside you, screaming for the clarity of the fast, but you keep drowning it in another meal. You aren't well-fed. You are biologically sedated. And if you never learn to be hungry, you will die having never truly met the person you were built to be. Does that change your perspective on your next meal, or are you already reaching for the cupboard? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious if this changes how you'll handle your next hunger pang. And if you want to keep diving into these hidden histories of our own biology, you know what to do. Stay sharp.